coronaphobia in Africa. Having read out the profile of today's panelists, it is important I restate that we intend to have an engaging and highly interactive session. Webinar attendants can use the chat button on their screen for commentaries and for questions. My co-moderator, Oluwafisayo Olorunfemi, has been assigned to harvest and aggregate the questions for the presenters at the end of the section. Voice commentary and questions can also be tabled at the end of the panel. Having said this, and before delving into today's business, I would like to call up our distinguished head of department, a scholar of international repute, Professor Olutayo Charles Adeshina, fellow, Nigeria Academy of Letters, to set us on course with an opening speech. Professor Adeshina, the floor is yours now, sir.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you all around. Let me start by thanking God for the safety of everybody. So many people have died, so many people are on hospital beds, but we thank God that you are all here safe.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me again? You
yes,
muted
we can
me.
hear you now.
Okay, all right. Let me congratulate all of you for this wonderful initiative. On June 18, 2020, I was speaking with Success about forming this kind of group, and I'm happy that she went ahead to do so. And I can see the cooperation she has enjoyed in making this a very wonderful forum. We are also going to listen to you very well to see what cues we can take from this, especially since we are also desirous of ensuring that history is not about the study of the past alone, but in knowing how the past can be used to inform the present and the future. And so we are hoping that by the time you make your submissions, we are also going to strengthen the study of medical history and the history of healing in Africa and elsewhere in the world as part of our curriculum. So once again, I say good afternoon, thank you, congratulations, and I'm going to be by the sidelines to listen to your discussions. You're all welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Adeshina, for that beautiful opening remark and for gracing us with your presence. We appreciate your efforts and those of our other panelists for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Also, I would like to acknowledge the presence of some of my lecturers, Professor Dr. Mansour Moritala. You are highly recognized. So without wasting any of our time, I would like to call up Professor Rashid Oyewole Olaniyi to present us an overview of pandemics and Africa response, finding a nexus between past and present rhetorics. All our presenters will be having 18 minutes and an additional 2 minutes to round off their presentation. Professor Olaniyi, you have the floor now, sir.
I joined the HOD in congratulating you for this initiative. It shows that we have embraced the technology for learning and teaching, such that we can also have best global practices in our historical production.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, we are with you.
We can hear you, sir.
Yeah, so much has been said about pandemics in Africa, and it is very clear from the literature that Africa has been very resilient to withstand and survive many of these pandemics. We have very complex historical experiences in the appropriation and usage of biomedicine for the treatment of diseases that many African countries have been battling with, especially from the 19th century up to now. We have issues with malaria, smallpox, syphilis, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, Lassa fever, cholera, measles, yellow fever, Ebola, and so on. So these are pandemics that African countries have been battling with. Of course, we live in a very unprecedented time, especially with this coronavirus. In the past, most of the pandemics are now in Africa affected some sections of the continent without affecting others. For example, malaria is a big problem in West and Central Africa today, but it is not at all in North Africa. So likewise, cholera is no longer a problem in many parts of Africa, but that is unlike coronavirus that is affecting Africa and all parts of the world. Under colonial rule, the medical issues were very exploitative indeed, because there was deficiency in terms of investment in the medical sector. Even though the colonial states try as much as possible to create a model, an European model in Africa, by enforcing issues on sanitary and also establishing hospitals, most especially infectious diseases hospitals. But despite these achievements, there was criminalization and condemnation of local forms of medical knowledge, which the colonial state described as unhygienic, barbaric, and full of witchcraft. So for a very long time, Africa responded to pandemics through what we can describe as medical pluralism, that is hetero medical practices, the mixture of European medicine and indigenous medicine. Now, the outbreak of COVID-19, especially in Africa in February, first with Egypt and next in Nigeria, presents a tale of two contradictions. One is that of a challenge, and the other one is that of opportunity. So this poses the central question that we need to ask ourselves as students of history. Is COVID-19 wrecking African history, or presenting an opportunity for our development, or a rethink for our development? With the historical experiences of tackling pandemics in Africa, how prepared is Africa in handling COVID-19, or how is Africa handling COVID-19? If we take global comparative experiences of countries that have successfully contained COVID-19, we can see that Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore in particular have done so by deploying a combination of measures, including enhanced level of preparedness arising from the legacy of the pandemic they had in 2002, 2004, that is SARS. So along the line, they have developed health infrastructure, large-scale testing, and rigid enforcement practices. Are we doing the same in Africa? After all, between 2014 and 2016, we suffered a lot from Ebola for those of us in West Africa. So how much have we learned from HIV/AIDS? How much have we learned from cholera and other pandemics in tackling COVID-19? In Africa, the experience of testing, contact tracing, immunization, containment, and surveillance during Ebola, Lassa fever have been very useful, at least to some extent. We all know the global accolades that Nigeria received in the treatment of Ebola. However, despite the accolades that Nigeria and other countries received during Ebola, we have overstretched facilities, aging facilities. For those in the in medical issue research, we know that the colonial state was very reluctant in investing in the medical sector. Most of the most of the hospitals were established by Christian missionaries, as we all know. Christian missionaries also invested heavily in education. So now most of the facilities in the post-colonial era are overstretched. Look at our UCH, University Teaching Hospital, Ibadan, and other teaching hospitals in Nigeria. So we see that the facilities are aging, they are overstretched. According to WHO, Africa lacks ventilators to deal with a pandemic. More than a third of Africa's population lacks access to adequate water supplies. Nearly 60% of urban dwellers live in overcrowded slums, making the virus to thrive. Also, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa warned that 300,000 people could die of COVID-19 and push nearly 30 million into poverty. This is already happening in Africa. If we take the example of Mali, that has a population of 20 million, it has woefully equipped hospitals. And we know Mali is nearly a failed state. Mali has just 20 ventilators to 20 million population. In Nigeria, we are battling with frequent labor strikes embarked upon by medical doctors. Many of them we are also suffering from brain drain arising from their migration abroad. Just last week, the Nigerian immigration tried as much as possible to prevent the migration of about 50 Nigerian medical doctors to the UK at this very critical time. So this has affected, the issue of manpower has affected the medical sector in many African countries. As a matter of fact, in Zimbabwe, many of their doctors have traveled abroad. So in many African countries, the state presence and public health facilities are very, very weak. And this problem became more compounded with the issue of privatization, which began in the 1980s. So as a result of that, many African countries did not invest in the medical sector. So they left a lot of problems to compound. So these factors influence the slow response of some African states in responding to mobilizing resources to tackle COVID-19. You will recall that Nigeria did not respond on time until Lagos State, try as much as possible to respond quickly to the outbreak of COVID-19. Now, concerning the responses, so that I don't know how many minutes I have left. Moderator, how many minutes do I have left? Hello? 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 Hello?
Yes, sir.
We can
Hello, sir.
I hear you,
Yeah,
sir.
you have 3
How
minutes
many
left,
minutes do
sir.
you have left?
3 minutes left.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
I will quickly rush it. So the responses in Africa included public health and social measures, innovation, new global partnerships, search for good governance, xenophobia, resistance, rebellion, and digital response. Now, let me explain all these factors briefly. Public health and social measures. Many African countries shut down borders, they enforce self-isolation for exposed persons, they establish isolation centers, they lock down cities, states, and communities, closure of schools, banning of social activities, prohibition of congregational prayers. They have also improved on effective communication strategies to prevent the spread of fake news and mistrust of authorities. Now, concerning search for good governance, various African countries provided social welfare through provision of cash and food items to vulnerable households. They have also assisted farmers in some ways, although it is not enough, entrepreneurs, women and youths. Then revision of budgets. This is very important. Many African countries have revised their budgets in order to cushion the effects of COVID-19. However, there is a problem with corruption because in many African countries, the budgets have been squandered by many government officials. In South Africa, for example, there is corruption involving 500 billion rand, about 26.3 million, $3 million relief fund to ease the impact of COVID-19. We also know that in Zimbabwe, President Mnangagwa sacked the health minister, Obadiah Moyo, over the abuse of office related to procurement fraud involving COVID-19 related medical items. Now, concerning innovation, so that I won't waste your time, medical innovation during the pandemic marked a historical watershed. In Ghana, for example, as access to diagnostic reagents became difficult, Ghana pioneered pooled testing of COVID-19 samples, thereby speeding up processing time and population coverage. In April 2020, Madagascar launched COVID-19 organics. However, many African leaders accepted that COVID organics, but as wider acceptance was denied both by WHO and unfortunately by the African Union, because the African Union mandated Madagascar to produce scientific evidence. So this is highly disingenuous for an organization that aspires to move Africa into the 21st century.
Professor
Now,
Lani, 1 minute.
Yes.
Try to round up, please, sir. 1 minute,
Okay,
sir.
okay. Now, we also have emergence of new entrepreneurs and so on like that. Then there's digital response. In this period, we have xenophobia. Rising socioeconomic grievances led to xenophobic attacks on Chinese immigrants in Nigeria, in Kenya, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, and so on. In fact, Nigeria High Commission was attacked in Ghana during this period. Now, this period has also witnessed rising criminality, including looting, robberies, rape cases, and so on. And rebellions of all kinds, banditry, terrorism, and so on have increased in South Sudan, in Congo, in Mali, in Mozambique. Then resistance in terms of myth and prejudice. In fact, in Nigeria, about 2 governors, I'm rounding up now, about 2 governors denied the existence of COVID-19. How are they going to prepare? How are they going to create strategies to solve the problem of the pandemic? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that brilliant and compendious overview, Professor Lani. On behalf of my colleagues and webinar attendants, I would like to appreciate you for that brilliant presentation. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the History Postgraduate Staff Advisor, Dr. Mutiat Titilokwe Oladejo. You are highly recognized, ma'am. Without wasting much of our time, yeah, thank you, Prof, once more. So without wasting much of our time, I would like to move to the next presenter, who is Dr. Adedamola Olatiba from Adekunle Ajasin University. So he will be presenting a paper on pandemics and medical research in Nigeria, a history of complexities and discontinuities. Dr. Adetiba. Hello. Oh.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome.
So finally.
You're welcome. Yeah. Welcome, sir. So you have 20 minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
Yes. So thank you so much. I want to appreciate and congratulate the Postgraduate Forum of the Department of History, University of Ibadan, for taking up this very beautiful initiative. When I actually heard about the theme of the webinar, I was actually very impressed with our interest in discussing topical issues as historians. And it shows how progressive we have made our scholarship to become as scholars. We just don't want to study the past without connecting it with the present. So I want to appreciate you for taking up that very beautiful initiative. I'll be discussing an ongoing project, actually. So this is actually a timely intervention for me. I have been working on the history of medical research while I was writing my PhD. There is actually a chapter in my PhD where I was provided some insights into the history of the Medical Research Institute, what we now know as the National Institute of Medical Research in Yaba, Lagos. So during the colonial period, it used to be known as the Medical Research Institute. Subsequently, in the 1920s, it was changed to the Yellow Fever Research Institute by the Rockefeller Foundation. They used it for close to 2 decades during the colonial period. And the emphasis of that facility, the major thing done in that facility was actually to advance biomedical research, especially to curb real life problems around diseases, epidemics, and pandemics. So that actually I became more interested in that kind of research during the pandemic, because I started seeing some of the things I discussed during my PhD playing out more glaringly with the way Africa features in the global effort against COVID-19. So when we look at actually the whole issue around COVID-19, it is actually a very important research category, or it is an important research subject to historians, medical historians, to scholars in medical anthropology, medical sociology. They actually discuss, though different things, they actually approach these subjects differently, but we eventually end up discussing very similar subjects, similar to the extent that we look out for issues around the whole thing around the politics of knowledge production. We look out for issues around the position play between the people we regard to as medical authorities and those kinds of issues. So one thing I noticed with the present pandemic, actually, when I started writing and revising that chapter into a paper, is that I actually noticed the position of of African states, and also research institutions on the African continent. Also, I also noticed the position of national health authorities in the global effort against COVID-19. Um, like Professor Rashid said, Africa has surprised the world. For now, we have defied expectations, but we are still far behind. There is still a continuation of the status quo. When we look at the various episodes I'll be looking at, you actually see some continuities and some discontinuities, and you actually know why Africa continues to lag behind as a result of neoliberalism, especially when it comes to curbing pandemics, coronavirus. And especially when we now narrow it down to medical research, why we don't have strong, viable research institutions competing with institutions from the global north. That is actually a very big issue. And that is an issue that we can actually want to trace back to the evolution of such kinds of institutions. So I will be focusing specifically on the Medical Research Institute, what we currently know as the National Institute of Medical Research. When you go to the website of the National Institute of Medical Research, you'll be surprised actually at the fact that you won't actually see anything happening just from a panoramic view of the website. You won't see anything concrete. Most of the reports you get on coronavirus, you get it from NCDC. You won't get anything concrete from the National Institute of Medical Research. And also, you also see another thing there is that when you also visit their records and the kinds of works they've been carrying out before and during the pandemic, you will notice that their work is actually more particular around the morphology of the virus. They want to understand the virus, the various virus strains in the country. That is what they want to do. That is what most scientists in the National Institute of Medical Research has been doing. And also, when you also broaden your searchlight to other sectors, like other research institutions and other departments of research, you actually notice similar trend. You see that we actually concentrate more on what is actually one of the least lucrative part of medical research. Three research are important when it comes to medical research, and that is understanding the morphology, vaccine research and production. Then the third is the whole thing around drug discovery. Drug discovery is actually a multi-billion-dollar investment. Most pharmaceutical companies currently in this neoliberal economy make significant money from Africa, from malaria, from HIV/AIDS, from a plethora of diseases. And at this point, when coronavirus started, you will see that raise among so many countries. And we started asking questions about who will benefit from the first set of vaccines that will be produced, who will benefit from the first set of drugs that will be produced. Will we have a balanced world if these drugs come up? Will Africa be left behind in the search of this? And somehow we see Africa relying on Western institutions. So medical sociologists will tell you that is actually still the status quo. That is what has been happening since the 1980s when neoliberalism took 1980s, 1990s when neoliberalism took full shape. At this point, states, national health institutions in African states started dragging back when it's on matters around vaccine production and also drug discovery. So if you look at the history of the National Institute of Medical Research from 1907, when it was established as the Medical Research Institute, you actually see that there is actually no difference in what it was then, in what was the agenda of empire and what it is now in the post-colonial world. So when it was established in 1907, the whole agenda was just a way to expand biomedical research such that we could have colonial laboratories featuring significantly in the production of medical knowledge. this is not to say that knowledge was not produced. Knowledge was produced, and the knowledge produced prior to this time were actually also recognized by Western science. When you look deep into post-colonial histories of medicine, you actually see how missionaries, how botanical gardens, how early doctors actually facilitated what we call knowledge transfer. So you see that kind of pattern in the 19th century. So now in the 20th century, there was the urgent need by empire to institutionalize medical research. And that started with the establishment of various colonial laboratories. After Joseph Chamberlain left the colonial office, the agenda of the colonial office changed remarkably. And at that time, we had a new system that was introducing or that was encouraging the establishment of colonial laboratories. So in Lagos, Lagos was recognized in the whole of West Africa for the establishment of one of the first colonial laboratories or research institutes, and that is the Medical Research Institute. So the Research Institute was supposed to serve the whole of West Africa this time. And that was because of the fact that, according to Eric Strachan, who was the principal medical officer at this time, he was talking about the advantage Lagos had because of the presence of the railway, even at this time. So when the institute was established in 1907, it was established because of the kinds of advantage it had at this point in time. It was also at this time that we also had other laboratories across the British Empire. For instance, in Kenya, we had the Nairobi Bacteriological Laboratory, also established at this time. In Hong Kong, 1907, we had the establishment of the Hong Kong Medical Institute. It was also the same case in India. In India, we had the Calcutta Research Institute, also established at this time, I think around 1910. So you see that it was the mindset of empire to establish that kind of facility. So the question we ask is that what kind of purposes or agendas were accentuated by the British Empire in establishing these kinds of facilities at this time? It was, the major agenda was because the British wanted these facilities to be closer to the specimen of research. So they wanted it to be closer to the research subject. They wanted it to be very close to the primary problems of the research, and that is the population in the tropical colonies. And that was actually why the British Empire was so much interested in establishing that institute. So from 1907 down to the 1920s, before we had the intervention of private philanthropies, we saw that most of the works carried out by the Medical Research Institute was more of works to understand the etiology of diseases like malaria. Before the yellow fever epidemic, starting from 1911, you see them carrying out various of entomological studies on the field. They go to swamps to collect samples of mosquito larvae to understand the peculiar, the rampart strain in a particular community. That was the kind of research going on. Then after, with the yellow fever, you now see a drastic change in approach, and you now see the British government. I mean, you now see these local laboratories, colonial laboratories, that serving as research hubs for international biomedical scientists. The Yellow Fever Commission, for instance, the Yellow Fever Commission, for instance, used the Medical Research Institute around this time for series of research. They sent investigators to use the laboratory. The laboratory was just like a vista through which they could penetrate research subjects. So it is convenient for us to claim that this area was more of a laboratory for international research, international research agendas. So by time private philanthropies like the Rockefeller Foundation started coming into colonies, you also see them using these kinds of facilities. In short, when you look at the archive, you actually notice that suddenly in the 1920s, you see a change in nomenclature. the institute, starting from the 1920s, and you now see that from the 1920s, the institute, because if you look at the archive, you see that the location hasn't changed, the discussion, the issues discussed hasn't really changed. The only thing that's changed so far is the institution controlling the facilities, and that is why we believe that it was the Medical Research Institute that metamorphosized into the Yellow Fever Research Institute, run by the Rockefeller Foundation. And also in that, you also see that kind of research playing out. You see in the report, you see research scientists going deep into the tropics and collecting research samples from subjects, going to schools in Lagos, also consulting with local doctors, consulting with colonial doctors to carry out investigations in the field. So you see that kind of pattern in that. But one thing that was added,
Dr. Adetiba,
yes.
Please to round up, please.
Okay, I'll round up now. So one thing you see in the analysis is that at this time, vaccine production became very rampant in Lagos, especially in that kind of facility. So it went on from the 1920s down to the 1970s. By the 1970s, when we had more companies, research institutes in multinational research laboratories coming into Africa, you see a drastic reduction in vaccine production. You see a drastic reduction in that kind of research, and you see more emphasis on biomedical research tailored towards studying the composition of the virus, the parasite, and these other issues around medical research. So to me, I believe that one way we can understand African participation in the global quest against COVID-19 is when we actually look at it when we look at the long history. We look at it starting from that period. In that way, you will see the kinds of discontinuities, and you'll be able to understand why we are where we are this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adetiba, for that refreshing perspective. I strongly believe that Professor Olaniyi's and your presentation must have stimulated reflections and questions among our webinar attendants. I can particularly see some questions already coming in, but this will be answered at the end of the webinar. So please, our panelists, endeavor to stay with us so we can provide answers to some of these questions. Without taking much of our time, I would like to move to the next panelist, Mr. Victor Olaoye, who would be presenting a paper on the place of Africa in disease control and eradication in historical perspective. Mr. Olaoye, the floor is yours, sir. Hello, Mr. Olaoye.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Sir, you have 20 minutes. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Victor Olaoye. Today I'm going to discuss the place of Africa in disease eradication and disease control in historical perspective. First off, I would like to acknowledge this opportunity be given to me. I'm elated. And besides, I'm very happy to have shared this platform with my professors that taught me at Ibadan School of Fishery. Professor Aru Holani Rashid Olani, he supervised my undergraduate project. Professor Adeshina, my colleagues, I'm very happy to be here. I'm honored. My presentation wouldn't based on the usual narrative of how Africans have been able to control diseases in the historical perspective. Sorry, you'll be disappointed if you're expecting me to look at the policies put in place, what Africans did during the pandemic of 1918. No, but instead, I intend to look at medical historiography, the place of Africa in medical historiography. How, for instance, when we look at Africa, the word comes to mind as far as medical historiography is concerned. You talk about Africa as a disease region. Most of the Western literatures, we talk about Africa as the place of white man's grave, sorry. And the question is, when we talk about Africa's, the role of Africa in disease control or in global health or public health, we shouldn't be how monoculture or have something we call a single story. Let me start from this. When we look at the pandemic of 1918, the Second World War, First World War, what happened, we need to understand the roles of we Africans, what we write about medical history. For instance, we have universities, African universities. What I've noticed this trend, we are obsessed with the idea of looking at the activities of the colonial government, the international organizations, ILO, WHO, Rockefeller Foundation, UNICEF. They eradicated social disease in Ibadan, in Lagos. The question is, what are the roles of African agencies? I'm not about African doctors, or what Moses Ochona has described as African agency, or what Klapati Mavunga called African intellectual agents. What have they done? History has taught us there wouldn't be any activities in Africa or anything in Africa without the contributions or without the participation of Africans themselves. If you look at the slave trade, it wouldn't have been successful. Like scholars like Herdu Bohen has argued that the slave trade in Africa wouldn't have been successful without the cooperation of the African chiefs. Fine. Then, if that's the case, then what about medical research in Africa? The point I'm trying to say is that Africa has always been downplayed when it comes to medical research. Look at the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller Foundation established its West African Yellow Fever Council in the 1920s, 1925 to be precise. And African doctors, African lab attendants were being made use of. You ask yourself, they made use of monkeys to carry out research. We'll look out for those monkeys. I'm talking about African hunters. Have we ever made reference to them? In the case of Nigeria, the Ebola crisis of 2014 or 20 thereabouts, Stella Adadevo prevented the Liberian from spreading the disease. Have we ever built a renowned school of public health in honor of Stella Adadevo? No, ask yourself, if she were to be a European or from North America, what would have happened? The point is that we are not writing our history, and that is why Africa has always been the lower rank when it comes to public health. So when you read any Western literature, it has always been a disease region. Europeans, they came in a somewhat triumphalist approach. They eradicated malaria, yellow fever. Just like if you're familiar with the seminar lecture of Sheila Marx, what is colonial about Africa? Sheila Marx reveals that most of the Western literatures about Africa, especially in South Africa, from 1900 onward, were the activities of the Europeans in South Africa. I remember one of the titles, My Patients Were Zulus. My patients. Yeah, your patients were Zulus, your patients, you did this, you did that, but you wouldn't have carried out those things without the support or the activities of Africans. Rockefeller Foundation, for instance, established Ibarapa Community Health Rural Scheme in 1963, and it was headed by Professor T.U. Ogunlesi. Ogunlesi happened to be the first professor of medicine in Nigeria. He and others Nigerian doctors that were trained, they performed perfectly okay. But when you look at the record of Rockefeller Foundation, it is practically difficult or impossible for you to look at reference being made to T.O. Ogunlesi. It looks as though that the Rockefeller Foundation came to Ibadan, came to Ibarapa, destroyed all forms of maladies without the support of Africans. The point is this, I think it is time we try to decolonize what I would call African medical historiography. African medical historiography should move from the level of United Nations eradicated polio, so foundation eradicated so disease. You wouldn't have done this thing without the cooperation of African doctors, African nurses, African midwives. I was part of a research program from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, headed by Dr. John Martin and Professor Martins in 2016 at the National Archives Ibadan. I saw files of African doctors and nurses that were trained in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, in the 1960s. I saw more than 200. They were trained. Not only that, the Rockefeller Foundation trained Nigerians public health experts. But the question is this: have we seen what they've done? But I will say Africa's historians need to, they have their own place, because we've started to look at the place of this international organization without looking at our own history. When you fail to look at your own history, you are going to be at the lowest cadre of historiography as far as African medical historian, as far as medical history is concerned. You ask yourself, the West African Yellow Fever Commission that was established by the Rockefeller Foundation in the 1920s at Yaba, Lagos, they made use of a particular species of monkey, rhesus monkey. Who looked for those monkeys? Nigerian hunters. Were they acknowledged? The question is no. The zookeepers, the lab attendants, were they acknowledged? No. It is time for African historians to look at the roles of small men in history. Though the one we've written, we've always looked at what Obariki might describe a big man in history. We've already discussed the roles of some renowned public health, Adetokunbo, Lucas, but it is time we begin to write our own history. It is time we begin to let the world know that there are more, that there are many things to say about Africa, apart from Africa being the disease region of the world. I reviewed a work on medical history written by an author, I've forgotten his name. I think a chapter was dedicated to Africa, and the title of Africa was Invasion from Africa. That is, the diseases came from Africa. As far as the author is concerned, the only thing that should be mentioned about Africa is that Africa transferred disease to other places of the world, to South America, North America, Europe. The point is, we need to look beyond this thing. If you don't write your history, no one is going to write your history. And I'm happy that the Ibadan School of History is at the forefront of promoting African agency as far as disease control or disease eradication is concerned. Like what I said in the beginning of this lecture, that I'm not going to look at that so happened 1980. No, scholars have written a lot. Falola, Killingray, Jumo, they've written about the pandemic in Africa. But I tend to look at the place of Africa in medical historiography. For instance, even when Africa had success stories in Southern Africa, let me state an instance, like look at Sesefly. The name Sesefly was given to the European, a European, Roland Gordon Coming, as he hunted in the upper Limpopo environs between 1843 to 1849. Sese is a Setswana language from Botswana. There are many attempts to alienate African knowledge production as far as medical history is concerned. I can tell you that Sese fly was anglicized, was given an English name by medical historians from Europe. It was later called Glossina, sorry, a Latin word for blood-sucking flies. The crux of my argument is this: we need to decolonize medical history. Africa should be at the forefront as far as the business of eradication of diseases, public health, or global health are concerned. And how can we do it? We need to promote it through our thesis, through our publication. I think I'm quite happy that one of the professors on this panel, Professor Adeshino, wrote a monograph on renowned public health expert in Nigeria, Oladele Ajose. We need to illuminate the work of Oladele Ajose. We need to illuminate the work of Adetokunbo Lucas. We need to illuminate the work of Sonia Dojo Onobamiro. We need to look at the work of early medical practitioners. Although Adelola Adeloye wrote a book on them, but those books that are like in passing. They didn't give us an extensive knowledge about what Africa has done as far as the business of disease control is concerned. We need to integrate traditional medicine in a broader historical scholarship. But like what I was saying, that all these attempts, I think there are many attempts to make Africa look like, no, you are the backwater of this, of that. You were not there. You were so. I think it is part of. I think the responsibility is on African historians to be more proactive in looking at historiography that promotes African agency. We can do better, like in promoting our traditional African medicine practitioners. We need to look at the works of African medical practitioners that were trained in Nigeria, that were trained in Europe, that were trained in North America. When they come back from those places, what were they doing? We need to look at what they were doing at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, at Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. By so doing, we will surely be at the forefront of disease eradication. But if we keep on writing the type of history we are writing, in which Africa has always been at the receiving end of a region in which Europeans came to abolish diseases, I think the status quo will still remain the same. My argument is this: we should write our story. If we fail to write our story, as far as medical historiography is concerned, the status quo will still remain and nothing is going to change. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Victor Olaoye, for that brilliant and concise presentation. I believe our webinar attendants will still be dropping some questions for you. For everyone, you could all go into the chat, and some questions are already popping up, and I could see the intellectual exchange between Dr. Taiwo Bello and Dr. Mansur Muitala. More such thing would be coming soon. So I think that's one other way of engaging ourselves in this webinar. Without much ado, I would like to call up Mr. Sheson Michael Johnson to present his paper on griefs, pains, and apathy in times of pandemic and epidemics, hierarching coronaphobia in Africa. Mr. Johnson, you have the floor, sir.
Hello. Hello, I hope you are hearing me.
We can hear you, sir.
Samuel Adegbenle. Okay, thank you. I think I need to acknowledge the efforts of Amaka, the lady that really contacted me at the beginning of this, the preparation towards this presentation. Then again, before I go on my talk, I also want to Rashid Olani. I really appreciate you, and also
Hello, Mr. Johnson. I think your network is breaking, sir. Are you with us?
Want to recognize the and allow it. So, okay, I'll be speaking on griefs, pains, and apathy in times of epidemics and pandemics, hierarching coronaphobia in Africa. And basically, my framework will be within, yes, we are talking about medical history since we're discussing epidemics, pandemic.
Please, sir, we can't hear you.
Hello, Mr. Johnson. I think there's a bit of challenge hearing you over here. Hello? Okay, I think we have to wait a bit for Mr. Johnson to reconnect and join us.
In Africa, but it will be at intersection of death studies.
Hello. Oh, I think Mr. Johnson is having challenge connecting to the internet, so we'll have to wait for him a bit, and subsequently we might have to move to the question and answer section. So Miss Oluwafi Sayo, Miss Fisayo, can you start getting ready? Peradventure, we are unable to get Mr. Johnson back online. Okay, we'll give Mr. Johnson 1 more minute to reconnect. If we're unable to get him back online, we'll proceed to the next item on our events program, and that will be the questions and answers.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, good afternoon.
I'm really sorry. Let me apologize on behalf of Mr. Johnson. I'm very sure he's doing his best to work on his network. I want to suggest we give him 5 minutes to work on that. I'll try to contact him. But in the meantime, if we have any contribution from anyone, the floor is open. It's not a question and answer series. It's just if you have 1 or 2 things to say as regards to what has been done already. Just 5 minutes, pending when we contact Mr. Session Johnson.
Okay, I think that's brilliant. Well, I think for this section, it would be appropriate if I hand over to Ms. Fisayo to take charge. Ms. Fisayo, so you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for your time and contributions so far. I've been having a lot of questions in the chat room, but like our host said, it's not yet time to ask those questions. It seems like Mr. Johnson is back. It seems like Mr. Johnson is back. So Mr. Semir.
I'm with you. So we would unmute Mr. Johnson now.
Okay.
So
all right, please, everyone should mute their background noise, okay? Mute your audio. We have Mr. Session Johnson back.
Hello.
All right,
hello, Mr. Johnson. Yes, you have the floor. You have the floor.
Okay, yes, thank you. So let me go straight so that because of my time. So I'm aware that history always plays unavoidable roles in interpreting pandemics and epidemics. Despite claims of the unprecedented nature of COVID-19, it's totally not new. And because if you consider other epidemics and pandemics, you will agree with me that they have some things in common. So, and those are the things I want to really talk about, especially from the angle of our orientation as historians. You know, historians have especially neglected any consideration of the effect of pandemics upon the mood or psychological state of the nation. So we always run away from this aspect. We want to leave it for sociologists and other social scientists to deal with the issue of emotional state of the sovereign, circumstantial effect of the disease. But here, like Professor Joanna Mock declared in his book, Fear, a Cultural History, he submitted that historians must look into history like this, because said to research the cultural history of an emotion, such as griefs, pains, and apathy, it is not more than, it is not just biological, it's also a specific historical events. So we must run away from not dealing with issue of medical history or public health history. And one thing I want us to take away from today's talk, from my own angle, that I want us of pain, grief, sorrow as a kind of, they may be unstable, but they are historically constituted and reconstructed in relation to social, economic, political, cultural, and environmental interaction. So if I put this differently, the issue of pains and griefs as suffered during pandemics, they do not just only involve physiological or biological processes, but these processes occur in negotiation with social, cultural, and political worlds. And when you talk about fears of pandemics or fears of epidemics, you will see that we have these even during the period. Like, for example, I look at the 1867 Iwe Iroyin, the report of this on smallpox in Abeokuta. You know, like, for example, the Iwe Iroyin of April 20th, 1867 on page 3, you know, there was a report about smallpox in Abeokuta. It said Iwe Iroyin referred to the disease as a dreadful disease. So this connotes fears on the part of the society at this point in time. Like, again, in Lagos, in his 20th, you know, like in one of his writers said, spraying gang employed for the colony abandoned the job because most of them fear to contract disease. As a matter of fact, they ran away. So, and this is just what some of the things we are experiencing now. The fear is everywhere, even among those people, the frontliners, those people that are really working on the field. And these are some of the aspects we have neglected in our writing of history of medicine, history of public health, history of diseases, of pandemics and epidemics. And like, if you look at the 1922 edition of the African Messenger, a newspaper also, it was reported that it is important to know that the social stigma and the fear of losing their property made people conceal information about influenza. So you can see, at that point in time, in 1918, 1919, people were even concealing the information that they have this disease. And like in my study of cholera in Ibadan in the 1970s, like I have the front page of the Tribune, the Nigerian Tribune, March 5, 1973. They fear the disease, the epidemics of cholera at this point in time. At a point in time, the whole city of Ibadan was paralyzed. People were not comfortable because they were afraid. You know, for example, there is this popular saying, they said, Jamala Loje, Loshonwola de Oyo. That shows that if you don't take care of your hygiene and you hit in Oje, before you say Jack Robinson, you find yourself admitted as cholera patients in Adioyo. Those are some of the way they have been able to show their fears at that point in time in history, especially in terms of influenza, in terms of smallpox, in terms of cholera. And let's come back to the fears, griefs, and pains in terms of COVID-19. We are all currently susceptible to multiple losses daily. Loss of financial security, loss of social or physical connection, you cannot hug again, loss of autonomy to move freely in the within your city, within your town, within your state, even across Nigeria, across Africa. People were not comfortable. People grieve over this. People fear to move out. People feel the pain. the fear of not even worshiping. People catastrophizing over threats to freedom of worship. People were not, they see it as a catastrophe. They see it as a danger, as a threat to their freedom of worship. They grieve. These are things that, even though one may think it is emotional, it is biological, but indeed, these grounded people economically, in terms of how they go out to do their job, and and that's why some people have argued that even the argument of some of the pastors it has economic undertone. Some argue that it has political undertone, and that's why we as historians we must historicize and carry out historical analysis of this kind of areas of life. People were not comfortable. They are feeling awkward in terms of wearing of face masks, not having to shake hands again, inability to hug again. These are areas that we need to begin to also historicize. And I also notice that there are apathy, indifference, and crisis of governance within the region of even managing COVID-19 presently. And you see that we have convoluted myths on COVID-19. Some people don't even believe that there is COVID-19, and this is more compounded by the approach and the reactions and of even political leaders. You see some of them even having, like in Oyo State, for example, when Taye Currency, one of the special advisors to the governor, was even having a concert amidst the period of COVID-19. And this shows on the part of the people confirming their fear that indeed there is nothing like COVID-19. But again, this has become convoluted. It has become a contradistinction because they are now witnessing deaths of people. But it's just a pity that, again, that we now see that people are saying this as a result of 5G. As historians, we also need to emphasize this and begin to see if indeed this is true or not, and the effect of this belief, on our belief system, and this is also aggravating our general adherence to myths that are not well founded, and the worst part of it is the fact that people are not really adhering to public protocol, not on the part of the government, but also on the part of the people, the public. And this is also a reflection on the way we have reacted to other diseases like cholera in Ibadan. That people, regardless of what the government has done, people still find it difficult to obey simple public health protocol. And these are some of the things we need to also look at. The other area is the area of death, the area of the way we have done a racking of suffering and death during this period of COVID-19. We see that I observe by my research that in all ramifications, people are beginning to say that maybe perhaps this is a disease of the rich, this is a disease of the ruling class, and this has serious effect in the way and manner the people, the members of the public, the masses, the way they are going about protecting themselves against the spread of the disease. And this has also aided the community spread of the disease in terms of number, especially in Lagos and also places like Kano, even here in your state. So I realize that people are saying it's not our disease, it is their disease. They are creating segmentation. They are thinking it cannot reach them, not until they begin to see the numbers being rolled out by NCDC, ministries of health, both state and federal ministries of health. I think in all, we've seen that there have been genderization, and this has also been proven by the NCDC, by their reports. There have been demographication of it. There have also been politicization of disease body. We see the way and manner even the people reacted against how the likes of what's his name, the CEO, chief of staff to president, the former chief of staff, Abba Kyari. It's as if people contested for his dead body. They were saying they need to not to allow him to be buried. they are saying since government has announced. So we've seen contestation over dead body. And as a matter of fact, I've also identified creation of two types of dead bodies during this period within the discussion of medical humanities. We see that we have what we call the pandemic dead bodies. We also have the non-pandemic dead bodies, people that didn't die from COVID-19, and the other one that died from COVID-19. But both bodies suffered a lot due to COVID-19 because of restriction in terms of burial arrangement, in terms of funeral arrangement, and some people couldn't even travel during the interstate lockdown. They couldn't carry the dead bodies of their loved one from one city to the other. And this affected, this increased the grief, this increased the pains, apart from the pains of losing their loved one, apart from the grief due to the lost one, they also grieve for their inability to also bury them, give them a befitting burial. So we see that.
Mr. Johnson, sorry to cut you short. Please, you have 3 more minutes to round up, please.
Okay, no problem.
Okay,
maybe I should go to my conclusion then, because I would like to conclude. I think it is apt to say that history of medicine is incomplete without a bottom-up oriented history. I think Victor Adeoye also alluded to that we need to write the history of common people, a history that documents the common people's experiences, as well as the belief and behavior that frame those experiences. Such a history will restore the history of medicine with its human face. So this will enable us as historians to increase our understanding of the discourses. Hello? So this will...
We can hear you, sir.
Okay, so this will also enable our understanding of the discourses, belief system, and medical, scientific, historical, and philosophical structure that underpin knowledges and behavior associated with being subjected to grief and pains and other attachments or detachments. So history can help us in this process of seeking to identify the needs and desire of people located within specific times and places. So COVID-19 has become one of the dangerous terrorists of the 21st century. Hence, we must continue to interrogate it. And in conclusion, I would like to say this, that if there is anything you want to take away from the presentation, that history of disease, history of pandemics, history of epidemics are not just epidemiological, but they are also historical. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, for that captivating and stimulating presentation. We are deeply grateful for that. And well, you sum up and cap today's panel, and that was a brilliant presentation. Well, the next item on our event program is question and answer. But I also believe the moderator would try to factor in commentaries, because I could see interesting intellectual engagement in the chat room. So for now, I'll hand the mic over to Ms. Oluwafisayo Olonfemi to take charge of the next item. Fisayo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Good afternoon, everybody. It's been an interesting, intellectually stimulating conversation. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being attentive. Thanks to our speakers today, Professor Olani, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Victor, and Dr. Adetiba. We are really grateful for your time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the information dished out and all the beautiful talks around the issue of pandemics and Africa's records between the past and the present. Okay, so because there are quite a number of questions, and I know that everyone would like to, some persons would like to add contributions after what we've said. So I'll just like us to take the questions first. Then when we are done with the question segment, anyone who has a contribution or something to say can just raise your hand. There's a session where you can raise your hand, so I would know and then call you after the question and answer session is over. Thank you very much once again. So the first question I have here is directed to Professor Olani. Someone wants to know, how do African intellectuals shake off the complex domination of the Western world in dictating the conditions for accepting medical research breakthrough from Africa? In this chat, it's still on this Zoom thing. Hello?
Yeah, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Professor Ola.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
sir. Thank
can
you,
you
sir.
go over? Can you go over the question
Okay, I'll
again
go over
for him?
the question again.
Okay.
So this question is directed to you, sir. Someone wants to know,
Okay.
how do African intellectuals shake off the complex domination of the Western world in dictating the conditions for accepting medical research breakthrough from Africa?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, the problem is very complex, a lot. This is due to the fact that African intellectuals are also part of the post-colonial problem. First of all, let's look at the ownership of the conception of research itself. Who owns what? You know, who owns the idea of that research? Who owns the funding? And who owns the publicity of that idea? The problem is that most of our African intellectuals also behave like their European counterparts. We have lost hope, you know, in the continent, such that we believe that only Europeans could do good things, they could invent things. And Africans are just providing subservient services to support Europeans. So this is the notion that many African intellectuals have, and they are part of the problem. In a way, African intellectuals rely more on research grants from abroad. They rely on fellowships from abroad. Even the outcome of their research are also patented by Western institutions. So they seek for global recognitions, you know, abroad. So these are part of the fundamental problems. So there is a little that these African intellectuals could do because they are part of the fundamental problems. Hello, are you listening to me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Now, you can see the rate of brain drain, especially in the medical sector. Many African highly trained medical doctors, having trained them in Egypt, in Tunisia, or in South Africa, or in Nigeria or Ghana, they go abroad to practice. We must believe in ourselves. We must believe in our own developmental initiatives, not that we continue to serve the interests of the West. So African intellectuals are part of the problem, and a problem cannot solve itself unless we are ready to embrace Pan-African spirit and nationalism. We cannot move forward. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you very much, sir, for that answer. Thank you very, very much. The second question is similar to that first one you addressed, and I would just like you to make a statement on it, because this question was not addressed to any of the speakers. The question is, most African health remedies are approved by WHO or biomedical conditions before it can be accepted. Sorry, I don't understand. Before it could be accepted by AU.
Okay.
Yes, that's what the person's question is. The person is saying sorry, sir.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
Well, it's a fact that discoveries, inventions in Africa are subjected to approval by WHO. This is very true. because we still have this sense of dependency on Western values and authorization. So this is why everything we invent here must pass through WHO. Even though we have our own institutions, we also have sovereignty, but sometimes we push aside our sovereignty and political autonomy and then subjugate ourselves to the authority of global institutions. So these are very grave issues that African countries are battling with now. But I don't think that most of the leaders we have in Africa now are ready to liberate themselves. Are they ready to liberate themselves from the whims and caprices of WHO or IMF or World Bank? So these are problems that we have now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. This question is from Taiwo Bello, and then the question is also directed to you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. The question goes thus: at what point during colonial rule did the colonizers begin to embrace medical pluralism, a combination of indigenous and European medicine, in dealing with pandemics, knowing fully well that they lacked confidence in local medical knowledge or medicine?
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, it was not Europeans that embraced medical pluralism. I didn't say that. It was Africans, or let me say, even it is Africans, because we are still doing it. There is continuity of that approach for Africans to have medical pluralism. Even within the context of this COVID-19, you've seen that the NCDC have been talking about people buying COVID-19 drugs in the black market and so on like that, local drugs, local herbs for COVID-19. So we have this problem of medical pluralism, not consumed by Europeans, but by Africans, because clearly the ideology of tackling pandemics, have been very, very complex. So many people rely more on both African herbs and European medicine. So that's what I'm talking about. Okay? So it is the consumption by Africans. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you very much for that answer, sir. I hope the person, Mr. Taiwo Bello, listened to that answer. This question is from Ibukonlua. It's also directed to you, sir.
Yeah.
Looking at the developments in Madagascar and their development of a vaccine to the ongoing pandemic virus, and judging by the lackadaisical attitude that followed European as well as African response to this development, what can we say are the factors that influences this response? And even if there was actually a cure coming from Africa that answers the problem that plagues the present period, what is the probability that our voices will be heard both at home and in the international space?
The denial of African invention or innovation is not new in global discourses. This has happened in science, in technology, in medicine, and humanities. So it's not new actually, but the disappointment is with the African Union. How can African Union accept that Africans should be used as guinea pigs of scientific research for COVID-19, whereas they deny the authenticity of COVID organic coming from Madagascar? Why? I mean, it is very disgusting for African Union to do that. What I expected African Union to do is to present this to a kind of scientific committee, if necessary, to test the efficacy of that, but not condemning it on their own, that they cannot accept a kind of monotherapy that will create drug resistance against malaria and against COVID-19. So that is very unbecoming on the part of the African Union to have condemned COVID organics coming from Madagascar, because that is killing Africa initiative. It is also undermining our capacity to develop. Why do we have African Union? Why are we aspiring to become developed? You know, how are we going to compare ourselves with Asian countries like Japan or with China? So when are we going to be independent? I hope you understand what I'm saying. So these
Yes,
are
sir.
so this is a big problem actually, because initially many African leaders were ready to accept that COVID organics. They were ready to procure it, but since they could not get authorization from African Union, they suspended that initiative. So it's quite bad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Muritala, good afternoon, sir. Hello, sir. Is Dr. Muritala online? Hello.
Mute. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Fisayo.
Yes,
How are
sir.
you?
Very fine, thank you, sir. This is a follow-up question to your response on what you said from the question that was asked to Professor Lani when you mentioned something about 1981. This person wants to know what, as a follow-up question to you, what was responsible for the British change in attitude towards African medical or indigenous knowledge, and why wait until 1918 before such meeting was conveyed? I don't know if you your response to that person's question was how the, let me just read your response, sir. Director of Medical and Sanitary Service pioneered the use and recognition of African herbs for healing in colonial Nigeria. This was done immediately in 1918, immediately after the outbreak of the influenza in 1918, when he invited indigenous African medical practitioners on how to use local herbs to combine pandemics. So a follow-up to that response that he gives, Mr. Taiwo Bello wants to know what was responsible for the British change in Africa towards African medical and indigenous knowledge, and why wait until 1918 before such meeting was convened?
Thank you very much, Fisayo. Well, it will be recalled that before the time of the pandemic, the outbreak of the influenza in 1918-1919, the colonial medical services or the colonial authorities, they did not actually recognize the indigenous medical practitioners. But immediately after the outbreak of the pandemic, and they thought of how to actually combat the pandemic, they started by adopting some of the measures that we are practicing now as far as COVID-19 is concerned, because the influenza then started from the ports. It started from the goods that were shipped into the country. And so some of the staff, the port workers, they were first isolated. So isolation is not a new thing. We have it already in history. They were first isolated. Then those who contrasted the disease were also isolated, and they were taken to the established hospitals where they actually emerged for their treatment. But after some time, they realized that something was getting worse, because if you look at the damage done by the influenza of 1918-1919, you would quite agree with me that yes, the COVID-19 is doing much, but then if you take the case of Nigeria, what we have recorded today is not, is not comparable to the damage that the influenza did within a year. If we have it on record that about 500,000 people died. And so they had no choice. At that point in time, the influenza seemed to have defied all foreign or Western drugs. And then Dr. Wood, in his own wisdom, decided to invite the indigenous medical practitioners. They were invited because of the suspicion that pervaded Western medical intervention. To them, medical intervention had failed because people died a lot in Abeokuta, in Lagos, in Ibadan. And of course, it was spreading to the northern part of the country. And you will quite agree with me that the Europeans, anything that would threaten the lives of their personnel, they didn't take it lightly. So that was the reason. They waited till that time because of the damage, the impact of that influenza of 1918. And of course, they made use of indigenous herbs and medicine, in line with what the traditional medicine practitioners provided. And so the efficacy of the herbs and the natural fruits and wheat in healing started from that period. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that answer, sir. Moving on very quickly, this question is from Dr. Muritala to Mr. Victor Olaoye. The question goes thus: apart from foreign scholarship of medical research in Africa, do you know of any African billionaire that has sponsored similar research in Africa? Mr. Victor Olaoye. Hello, are you there? Hello, sir, are you there?
Okay.
I don't think Mr. Victor is available.
Okay.
Okay.
Move on. I think Dr. Adetiba is raising his hand.
Okay, I want to take the questions first. Dr.
Okay.
Adetiba, do you want to answer the question on his behalf, sir?
Dr. Adetiba.
Yes. And
okay.
And I also
sir.
have one or two things to say as regards the first two questions are about medical research, about how African scholars have shaped medical research on the continent. But let me start with the question directed at Victor. I understand Victor's perspective very well, and one thing I know about that perspective is the fact that we actually have to involve African in the whole conversation around medical knowledge production. So in my reading on the history of tropical medicine, I actually realized that starting from the 1890s, when the colonial government was actually very interested in institutionalizing the discipline and locating it within the continent, they actually relied on African resources. For instance, if you look at the establishment of the London School of Tropical Medicine and its Liverpool counterpart, and you also look elsewhere in the French Empire with the Pasteur Institute, you actually understand that Africans contributed significantly, or these colonies in Africa contributed significantly to the establishment of most of these metropolitan schools as far back as the 1890s, and even in the running of the schools. So you actually see how our resources were used in establishing some of these very sophisticated institutions actually in the global north. And you also see African contribution playing out well in the role of African in diasporas, especially those that worked in the British Empire. For instance, you see the role of Eric Strachan. Surprisingly, Eric Strachan is African American, is Jamaican, but is of African descent, even first generation. And you see the kind of contribution he made, especially in undertaking the etiology of malaria, for instance. In short, when I worked, during my PhD, when I worked at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine archive, I saw this series of correspondence between Eristrakan, who was the principal medical officer in Lagos, and Ronald Rose, who got the Nobel laureate for discovering the parasite responsible for malaria. So you see that kind of correspondence, and you actually see at certain points how he disagreed with Ronald Rose about his knowledge and the kinds of information, the kind of knowledge and theory he propounded, and how he published such kinds of presentations in learned journals. So you see, for us to understand African participation, we actually have to locate it within the grand narrative on history of medicine. Then I am also very interested in raising some dust, and that is when I looked at this issue with the COVID organic discovered by Madagascar. And one question I asked is, how African is that organic? Should we say an organic is African because the component of that organic is African? Is that what makes a drug African? So are we going to lay claim to the fact that drugs like quinine, drugs like artemisinin, so many drugs that were discovered from African herbs or herbs
We're
located in Africa?
losing you.
Hello?
Hello, I can hear you, sir.
Yes. So are we going to say that it is only when a particular drug is or the components of a drug is gotten from Africa that it is African? And to say that means that we will be overlooking so many very complex episodes in the transformation of African medicine from what it used to be during the colonial period through to the colonial episode. Because we saw, when you look at the history of healing in Africa, for instance, you see African healers, especially in the early 1900s to the 1920s, trying to adapt Western paradigms, Western theories and systems just to legitimize their knowledge. So what happens with that kind of adaptability? What happens with that knowledge, that African knowledge? You see the same with Western knowledge. You see the same with other kinds of knowledge. So I am actually very interested in that kind of conversation to actually see, to actually understand the kinds of things we call African. How African is the drug in Madagascar? How African are most of these drugs produced in some of these tradomedical centers, or modern day tradomedical centers you have in Ogun State and Lagos? How African are these if they are using Western apparatuses to produce these kinds of products? Then also the question that was asked to Muritala, I'm actually very interested in that conversation, because currently I'm working on a paper that was recently accepted in the Social History of Medicine journal, and one of the major arguments we had in that journal is that, with some of my reviewers, is that we actually have to look beyond the ability of the colonial state to transform. The colonial state was not that strong and sophisticated to do some of these things we are ascribing to them. For instance, in the way I would read Dr. Hood's call for medical practitioners or African medical practitioners to intervene in the influenza is actually when I look at the mindset of empire, or the mindset of some of his colleagues before that period. And I tend to see that in the archive, to say that the colonial state in Nigeria has never been quite glaringly against African medicine. And that is actually one of the things I discovered in that paper, to say that they never said anything against it. Instead, they promoted African medicine because of the inability of empire to meet some of its responsibilities, especially in rural communities. So you see them promoting these kinds of things. So one thing I know about the colonial state is that the colonial state permits improvisation. It permitted improvisation, and it also gave room to medical missionaries. It gave room to African chiefs. It gave room to African healers to operate, as long as it will sustain colonial hegemony, as long as it will sustain the power of the colonial state. So I just think we should also look at it within that point of view or perspective.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for that wonderful contribution. Thank you very much. Okay, so Matthew Ayodele is asking a question directed to two people, Mr. Victor Olaoye and Mr. Johnson. Is Mr. Victor back online? Okay, if not, please, our HOD, Professor Adeshino, please can you just help us with this question? The question reads thus: is it safe to state that African historians have been interacting / engaging in African medical history within the context of Eurocentric perspective or framework?
Well, thank you very much, and let me also congratulate our speakers and presenters. Well, that's a very valid question. And let me also link it with Dr. Adetiba's position. Dr. Adetiba was asking how African are the drugs produced in Africa. And when you ask such a question, you also then begin to understand what history is and what history is not. History talks about people, about society, but you also have to talk about it within the context of continuity and change. Now, the local producers, the local babalawos, also work on belief systems. If he gives you a drug and he knows you don't believe in it, that drug is half messed up already. And so they also study the psychologies of societies. So if you no longer have any respect for their drugs, then they begin to mix those with something you can believe in. Because if they give you a drug now and say, oh, make some incantations before you use it, you laugh. But for them, that's where the efficacy comes from. So nowadays, they are aware of the changes in society. How many of you do want to take Agbo, for instance? You'd rather take Panadol. And so, if it is the Panadol age, then of course, they tell you that, well, it is the same thing they use in making Panadol that we have put there. They are working on your psyche. And so, if African historians are now working on the history of medicine, on the history of healing, the methodology that has been given to us to work on these things will also stay within that frame. When you want to step out of tune, they bring you back to say, no, that's not workable. And that is also what has also informed my own transitions away from core economic history as my epistemological foundations. Because we begin to see that if you say, oh, I'm working on economic history, I have to use economic history materials, I have to concentrate on documents provided within the context of it, then you are going to lose a lot. Where are you going to put the socio-cultural aspect of things? Because there is no way you can write any aspect of this without understanding the ramifications, the entire ramifications. So now I'd rather tell people that I work on history within the context of, the interactions of all the subfields, in its interlocking dimensions. If you work on a political history, for instance, and you neglect economic history, you are going to lose a lot. If you work on religious history and you neglect the political aspect, you are going to lose a lot. So let's begin to understand history within the context of its interlocking dimensions. And then, of course, that takes me to the position of Mr. Johnson. History of pandemics is not just epidemiological, but also historical. Precisely so. When you understand this within the historical context, political context, socio-cultural context, psychological context, you are getting the focus. So we have to understand the society we are working on first in its entire ramifications. If you don't, any research that you are going to bring out will be Eurocentric. And that's what we are neglecting. And so I hope that history will be able to recalibrate and begin to understand that its focus is society, not writing the thesis for a global audience alone. Yes, the thesis is global, but it has to come from a particular epistemology. And that epistemology is about your own people. It's about your own society. If you don't do that, you're not going to contribute anything because they tell you, oh, we knew about that already. What are you contributing? And that's the position our young historians should begin to follow now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very, very much for that wonderful contribution, sir. We are grateful. The second question from Mr. Matthew reads thus, and is directed to Mr. Johnson. I believe you are still online, sir. The question reads thus: historicizing pandemic, the case of Africa from colonialism to post-colonialism. What would you regard as the changes and continuity in role of media in Africa? Mr. Johnson, over to you, sir. Okay.
Mr. Johnson, please unmute your mic.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay, thank you for this wonderful question. Let me start with the position of Professor Adeshina and Professor Lani, that we need to begin to look inward and begin to see how we can write our history, especially medical history. Like the role of the media, like in my own research experience, I realized that the media, particularly the newspaper, play critical role in helping the people and governments to understand diseases in terms of the dimensions of it in pandemics or epidemics. Like, take for example, the first indigenous newspaper in Nigeria, perhaps in sub-Saharan Africa, Iwe Iroyin captured the cause and causes and even reactions and counter-reactions towards this disease, especially smallpox, influenza, and what have you. And with beyond just communicating, beyond just passing information, beyond just telling the people about the disease, the newspaper, this also happened in Ibadan in the 1970s during the cholera period. They captured the indigenous medical knowledge system. They help to promote the public discourse within the community, not just from the government angle. They help to also use newspaper in particular as a means of pedagogy in terms of educating people, educating the masses about scientific knowledge, and also producing indigenous African scientific discourse, indigenous African medical discourse. So, but coming back to now, what I realize is because I'm also a journalist, I realize that what we do more now is even demonizing our indigenous medical knowledges, and this is not good for our knowledge system. It's not good for our epistemology. It's not good for our knowledge production. So I think the media, radio, television, newspaper, and even now social media, we should begin to interrogate the indigenous medical knowledge system. And instead of allowing government, because as we speak now, our government will continue to rely on WHO. Our government will continue to rely on orthodox medicine, but our media, particularly radio, television, and social media, we should begin to also engage the so-called herbalists, quote and unquote, not spiritualists, those people that deals with herbs. You can imagine when we are talking about COVID-19, you realize that officially the elite or the ruling class, they rely on orthodox medicine. But the people themselves, without waiting for the approval of the government, they went ahead and they begin to use these apps. And that maybe that I know we still need to historicize this, we still need to engage this historically. But I am of the opinion that this is part of the things that have helped Nigerians in particular to be able to survive this COVID-19. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is this. If we are writing medical history, public health history, history of pandemics, we should just go beyond just following Western historiography. We should embrace African historiography and begin to go into the archives. Let's see what our newspaper, what our radio, what they have done in the past. And also,
thank you very much,
we
sir.
should not run away from contemporary history. I think, okay, let me just round up with this. So just like
Thank
Professor
you, sir.
Adesina acknowledged during the introduction, that, okay, thank you, okay.
Thank you very much, sir. We're very grateful for that contribution. The last question I have here before if you want to make contributions, please just raise your hand so that I can call you after taking this question. This question is from Nafiu, and is directed to Professor Olaniyi. Sir, the question reads thus: is there any specific research work in Nigeria or in Africa on indigenous ways of tackling this virus? Is there any scientific research work here in Nigeria or in Africa on indigenous ways of tackling this virus?
Okay. Researchers. So many works have
Hello, sir. Your network is breaking.
Professor Olaniyi, your network is breaking, sir.
The line is breaking. Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Your line is breaking. We can't hear you, sir.
Most especially online. If you search on
Okay, Professor Lani has left the meeting. Before he's able to rejoin us, I can see the hands of Oladayo Balogun. So please, you can just give your contribution and make it very brief, sir. You have just a minute to make the contribution you would make. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Oladayo Balogun. Mr. Oladayo Balogun.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay, the network is back. We can hear you now.
Okay. I just want to appreciate Mr. Victor Laoye's effort in his presentation. And then my contribution is to his paper also. I believe that beside writing about the forerunner medical expert in Africa as a way to decolonize the medical research and global health history in Africa, I think that another thing we can do is to begin to be calling the attention of the global health experts to the fact that Africa is a partner in writing about African history, especially medical history in Africa, rather than a research site. For instance, the Ebola disease, I believe that is more deadlier than COVID-19 is that we are battling with. The West African till it spread. It didn't go beyond the region of West Africa, unlike COVID-19 that we are having now, which originated from China and then it spread across the whole world. So if Africa, or if West Africa precisely, was able to curtail the spread of this disease, I believe the other parts of the world, they have something to learn from Africa, especially China and America and the whole Europe. So it is high time they stopped seeing Africa as research site and instead as research partners in African medical research. Thank you. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Mr. Oladayo Balogun. Professor Olani was back in the room for a minute, but it seems like he's not around again.
I'm around. Hello, I'm
okay,
around.
sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. All right, sir.
Well, what I'm saying is that despite the lockdown and restrictions of movement, researchers are working, and quite a lot has been written and published online concerning COVID-19. So if you search on Google and other facilities online, you will see quite a lot of materials that you can read on COVID-19, both in Africa and elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much for that contribution, sir. Apart from Oladayo Balogun, I don't think anyone's hand is up again. So is there any more contributions from anybody? All right. Professor Adeshino, sir, we would just like to know your general contribution on all the questions and answers that has been given so far, sir, before we call it a wrap for today. Hello, sir.
Yes, how are you?
All right, sir.
Yeah, you had the control button, so I had to wait for you.
Okay, sir.
Well, what more I want to say? But to thank everyone for their exceedingly wonderful perspectives. But what I can take away from here now is that we still need not only to do more research, but to understand why we are doing what we are doing. Is it production of knowledge for the outside world? Is it production of knowledge simply because I want a PhD or I want a master's? We must begin to understand how to produce usable knowledge. In recent years, we have a problem. We have had some problems of people wanting to come into the PhD program today and wanting to graduate tomorrow. And that has left us in a very bad shape. Because you read some PhD thesis and then you hardly find anything in this thesis. Like the Latin invocation I normally like to use, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Yes, you get your PhD, you go away, but where does that leave the next generation who read your thesis? So we must now go back to the drawing board to understand why we are doing what we are doing. And of course, we can't leave you alone to do this simply because we know the terrain. Even to get things out of the archives now is a big problem. Not only are the documents getting bad, they are also being misplaced. And of course, in some cases, you also still have to shake body before the documents are given to you. So the research terrain is becoming extremely difficult. And the question they always ask is, so what are you doing about it? Well, we are doing much about it, although it's not yielding enough results. But what I propose to do in the next couple of months, years, is to also organize how we can get resources for people who are going to come into our PhD programs. If you have money to actually do your research thoroughly in 4 years, and we sponsor the research, then you are likely to do a thorough research. But if you are the one funding everything and you drink gari and kuli every day, it's not in our collective interest. So we have got to mobilize funding for some of our programs. So if every year we could sponsor 2 PhDs in medical research, in medical history, 2 PhDs in economic history, 2 PhDs in social history, that will also help our candidates. And so in the next couple of years, we are going to see a kind of transition in how we run our postgraduate programs. It's going to be tough, but I love tough challenges. And so I have learned a lot from the perspectives you are giving us. I have seen works already done. I have seen where the gaps are that we need to fill. And I can assure you that we are also going to be partners with you. It's not something that we have to leave you to, but we are going to partner with you to ensure that the research terrain of the Ibadan School of History is also once again elevated. We have had stories of how Ibadan School of History used to be this, used to be that. Well, I call that parallel hunting. They didn't have the kind of challenges we have now. But now we have our own challenges. We must confront those challenges. And so we are going to help you, but you are also going to help us. So I thank you very much for this wonderful initiative. It's the signs of the times, and it's passing a message to you. And that message is, it's a different world. We need students, we need products who have good initiative, who are responsive, who are responsible, who are go-getters. That's what we want. And so with all this now, I can see that, yes, you are ready for the challenges of the 21st century. So like I told some people in another webinar meeting I had yesterday, I told them, as we used to say in the Catholic Church, go in peace and sin no more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very, very much for that contribution. So this point, with the absence of, thank you very much for your questions, your contributions, and engagement in the chat room. I'll be handing over back to our moderator, Mr. Seni, to take us to the next round of webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Isayo. Thank you to all our panelists, our teachers, mentors, and colleagues. We have really had an engaging afternoon today. So the next item on our event list is the vote of thanks, and that will be done by no other than Dr. Mutiat Titilope Oladejo of the Department of History, University of Ibadan. Ma'am, the floor is yours, ma'am. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, we
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, ma'am.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Even though the network is not so good, but I've tried to follow every speaker from the beginning. I listened to Dr. Mr. We have, hello?
Hello, we can hear you, Ma.
Okay. We have learned a lot from the exposition, and to a certain extent, a number of issues they raised goes a long way to tell us as postgraduate students that there are several research gaps we need to unravel, much as there are debts of funding on research generally in Africa. And as our HOD earlier said, when we do research, we must also understand the intentions for doing the research. Is it for the benefit of the society, of the benefit of the global society? Most of these research funding organizations also have their aims and objectives. So as we move on in the pursuit of research career as postgraduate students, you find out that there are several undercurrents in the field of research. But more importantly, for African development, we need to just do the research.
We can hear
and make
you,
sure
sir.
that our research interfaces with public engagement. It's useful for our society. It's only when our research is useful for our society that we can easily say that we have impacted on the society. And so I like to appreciate the head of the department for his contributions. I appreciate the PG students for organizing this. And I believe that and this is going to be the beginning of new ways of impacting knowledge on each other in the department. I appreciate all the speakers, Professor Laniyi, Dr. Adetiba, Mr. Sesson Johnson, Mr. Victor Olaoye. And to you, all the participants, I would like to encourage you that this is just the beginning. Ibadan School of History is renowned for giant strides. And I heard you that for you to be part of Ibadan School of History as postgraduate student, then you need to think deeply, have new insights, and understand the society in such a way that you too will be able to come up with new initiatives for research in the future. And so I congratulate everyone for being able to make this day, and we have more of it by God's grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks. On this note, I would like to thank all our dinner attendants, from our teachers, to mentors, our panelists, and colleagues. We are very grateful for your support and encouragement. So thank you once more for attending.